Welcome back, Gearheads. In the 1970s, Japan was building cars your uncle drove to work, while secretly outrunning Mustangs on the weekend. No wings, no noise, just quiet killers. One of them could hit highway speeds before a Porsche even cleared second gear. These are the 15 unknown Japanese sleeper cars of the 1970s. Let's get into it. Number 15. 1975 Nissan Stanza 1600 GX. From the outside, it looked like something a school principal might drive. Boxy, responsible, utterly forgettable. But this next machine, tucked under that plain sheet metal, had just enough bite to humble cars twice its reputation. Built on Nissan's lesser-known A10 platform, the 1975 1600 GX was part of the Violet series, an oddball caught between economy and ambition. It wasn't the top-tier Bluebird, and it didn't pretend to be. But Nissan quietly gave it just enough muscle to make people blink twice. Under the hood, a rev-happy 1.6-liter L16 engine pushing out 95 horsepower and 94 pound-feet of torque. Modest on paper, sure, but paired with a lightweight body and a tight 4-speed manual, it could lurch off the line and pull 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 11 seconds. Not blistering by today's standards, but in mid-70s suburban Japan, it was sneaky fast. The 1600 GX trim wasn't all badges either. It had sportier suspension tuning, dual carburetors, and, crucially, less weight to carry around than its siblings. That gave it an edge in corners and quick bursts of acceleration, especially when lined up against domestic rivals that looked faster than they actually were. The GX felt alive above 3,500 RPM, rewarding drivers who knew how to keep it on the boil. On tight roads, it could embarrass bigger, thirstier machines, but not everything was golden. The styling was forgettable at best. Another bland 3-box sedan in a sea of similar shapes. Inside, it was functional but uninspired, with plastic trim and minimal driver engagement, unless you were really pushing it. And the moment you popped the hood and saw L16, instead of something more intimidating, most gearheads would turn away. That's exactly why it worked. This was a car that thrived on being underestimated. It didn't need wide fenders or racing stripes. It needed an open stretch of road and someone who understood what it could really do. It was a mechanic's special, a cult favorite, and a sleeper in the truest sense. And just when you think you figured out Nissan's game, the next car on the list shifts the story again. This one's got an even quieter voice and a far meaner punch. Number 14. 1973 Mitsubishi Galant 2000 SL. The last car may have looked like a secretary's runabout, but this next one, it wore a suit, kept its head down, and punched way above its weight class when no one was watching. At first glance, the 1973 Mitsubishi Galant 2000 SL looked like corporate wallpaper. Straight lines, chrome trim, polite proportions. It was the kind of car parked outside middle management offices, shuttling company men between meetings. But Mitsubishi had quietly slipped in a wild card. A bigger engine meant for bigger things. Beneath its mild-mannered exterior sat a 2.0-liter Saturn inline-4, producing 115 horsepower and around 119 pound-feet of torque. Not outrageous numbers, but crucially, it delivered them with urgency and a surprisingly wide power band. The 2000 SL wasn't the fire-breathing GTO GSR version, but that's what makes it interesting. It shared the same platform, and the engine wasn't far off. The key difference? The body. This wasn't a sports coupe. It was a clean-cut 4-door sedan, the kind that wouldn't raise eyebrows in a company parking lot. And yet, in the right hands, it could sprint to 60 miles per hour in under 10.5 seconds, enough to keep up with bigger, pricier imports from the US and Europe. Throw it into a corner, and it didn't protest like a lazy commuter car. It responded tightly, like it had something to prove. What made the SL variant so special was its subtlety. No rear spoiler, no racing stripes, just a tasteful badge and a quiet growl when you push the throttle. It was the kind of car your dad might have driven, until someone tried to race him at a red light and ended up trailing its taillights. Of course, it wasn't perfect. The cabin felt dated even by early 70s standards, and the steering could be vague at speed. The weight distribution wasn't ideal either. Up front, it felt heavier than it should have. But none of that mattered to those who knew its secret. This car could run. It was the kind of sleeper that survived by keeping its mouth shut. And just when you think Mitsubishi had no more surprises left, the next entry steps in with a badge you think you know, but specs you definitely don't. Number 13. 1974 Toyota Corona RT104 2000 GT. If the Galant 2000 SL was the polite office worker with a secret hobby, this next one was the neighborhood uncle, always around, always quiet, until someone brought up the performance. Then his eyes lit up. At face value, the 1974 Toyota Corona RT104 2000 GT didn't stand out. It was a staple of middle-class Japan, known more for reliability than speed, a car you'd expect to find outside a pharmacy, not tailing a Skyline through mountain passes. But the 2000 GT badge on this one wasn't just for show. Toyota quietly fitted it with the same 2.0-liter 18RG twin-cam engine that powered sportier Celicas and Carinas, an underrated gem that spun freely and delivered 130 horsepower and around 123 pound-feet of torque. That's a healthy bump over the usual Corona fare, especially in a car that looked like this pedestrian. With its modest grille, squared-off taillights, and conservative stance, the RT-104 looked like a family car. And it was. But it also happened to do 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 9.8 seconds, which put it in the same ring as some European compacts twice the price and prestige. The 2000 GT trim brought more than just power. It had stiffer suspension, better gearing, and a dash layout that felt just a bit more driver-focused than the economy trims. Yet from the sidewalk, nobody would ever guess. No scoops, no fender flares, no aggression. Just a quiet, confident sedan that could surprise anything from a Datsun 260Z to an Alfa Romeo GT Jr., especially when driven hard. Still, it wasn't without flaws. The steering felt numb under pressure, and the rear end could get squirrely on imperfect roads. It also didn't help that the GT badge was shared across multiple Toyota models, muddying its identity. Was it a performance car or just a trim package? Most dismissed it as the latter, and that's where they went wrong. Because under that dull beige paint and vinyl roof was something Toyota didn't talk much about. A genuine backroad performer with nothing to prove. And just when you think Toyota had played all its hands, the next car shows up with even less flash and just enough fury to rewrite the rules again. Number 12. 1977 Nissan Laurel 2000 SGX C130. If the Corona 2000 GT was the quiet uncle with a past, then what comes next is the uncle's older brother, more refined, more composed, but not someone you'd ever want to challenge in a straight line. The 1977 Nissan Laurel 2000 SGX C130 looked like it belonged in a tax accountant's driveway or parked at a wedding hall, blending in perfectly with its understated chrome details, conservative silhouette, and dignified presence. But hidden beneath all that calm was a surprising amount of muscle. Nissan outfitted the SGX trim with the 2.0-liter L20E inline-six, one of their early fuel-injected engines. It made around 130 horsepower and 130 pound-feet of torque, respectable for a car its size and whisper quiet in operation. This was no sports car, but it had poise. It could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in roughly 10 seconds. Not earth-shattering, but a quiet threat in an era where most sedans were barely crawling into the double digits. And unlike flashier cars of the time, the Laurel didn't advertise what it could do. No racing stripes, no wild wheels, just long body lines, soft leather, and a hint of menace if you look too long at the dual headlights. But the best part? It shared chassis DNA with the Skyline of the era. So while the Laurel wasn't tuned like a GTR, it had similar bones. Swap the tires, maybe the springs, and suddenly this polite sedan started behaving like something that didn't belong in the slow lane. Of course, it wasn't perfect. The Laurel learned more luxury than raw performance. Its weight dulled some of its athletic potential, and it was tuned for comfort first. But that's what made it the perfect sleeper. It didn't try to be a sports car. It was too busy being better than one, quietly. Number 11. 1975. Nissan Sunny Excellent 1400 GXPB 210. From the outside, it looked like every other compact car pulling into a suburban driveway. Modest, boxy, and built for practicality. But behind the wheel, things were different. Sharper, punchier, and far more alive than you'd expect. This was the 1975 Nissan Sunny Excellent 1400 GX PB 210. A car that kept its cards close to the chest until the road begged for more. Born from Nissan's ambition to inject new life into its Sunny lineup, the Excellent was a step above. While the standard Sunny B210S were focused on efficiency and affordability, the PB210 chassis brought with it a unique trick, a 1.4 LL14 engine, pulled straight from a larger platform. That meant 95 horsepower in a car weighing under 900 kilograms. Suddenly, your mild-mannered commuter had real teeth. The The twin-carb setup gave it crisp throttle response and surprising mid-range torque for a car of its class, nearly 115 Newton meters, putting it well ahead of the economy crowd. While not built for drag strips, the 0 to 60 mile/hour sprint in just under 11 seconds felt quick when paired with the light, responsive chassis and nimble suspension. You could hustle it through corners and leave heavier, more bloated sedans second-guessing their footing. But what really made the 1400 GX a sleeper was how stealthy it looked. No flared fenders, no racing stripes, just the subtle GX badging, slightly wider steel wheels, and a keen eye would notice the tachometer tucked into the dashboard. That was it. Everything else screamed, "I'm just here to pick up the groceries." Yet it had the lungs to run with some of the best compacts of the decade. It never tried to be flashy, and that was its genius. It blended into traffic, disappeared into parking lots, and still had enough grit to go head-to-head with cars carrying twice the attitude. The sunny, excellent 1400 GX didn't shout, it whispered, and that whisper was often fast enough to leave others in the dust. Number 10, 1977. Toyota Carina 2000 GT. That last Corolla was all bark hidden under a beige sweater. But what if the next one didn't bark at all, just calmly walked past you while secretly holding a black belt? The 1977 Toyota Carina 2000 GT was a lesson in misdirection. It looked like it had somewhere sensible to be, parent-teacher meetings, maybe a late-night pharmacy run. But under that upright conservative shell sat a 2.0-liter 18R G-twin cam heart, tuned for 130 horsepower and capable of a brisk 0 to 60 miles/hour time in the high 8-second range. That's knocking on the doors of European sports sedans twice the price. Unlike the Celica or the more flamboyant coupes, the Carina wore no muscle. It was narrow, boxy, and softly sprung, but it was lighter than you'd expect and far more balanced in the corners. With McPherson struts up front and semi-trailing arms in the rear, it could surprise more than just muscle cars. It had enough composure to unsettle an Alfa on a Sunday drive, and thanks to its high-revving engine, it didn't just move quickly, it felt alive doing it. The name Carina rarely stirred up excitement. It was meant to sit between the more exciting Celica and the practical Corona. But the 2000 GT trim, offered quietly in Japanese showrooms, was a wolf pretending to be an office clerk. It even came with a 5-speed manual, rare in a car that looked built to cruise at 40. But this wasn't a car without flaws. Cabin noise at higher revs bordered on obnoxious. The cabin trim was economy grade at best, and the lack of aggressive design meant even enthusiasts overlooked it, then and now. But that invisibility, that's exactly what made it dangerous. So here's a question for you. If you had to park one of these sleepers in your driveway, subtle outside, savage inside, would it be this understated Carina? Or does another car on this list speak louder in silence? Drop a comment and let me know. Number 9, 1971 Isuzu Florian 1600 SS. That Carina may have kept its fangs tucked away, but the next contender, it didn't even have teeth on paper until you found out how fast it could bite. The 1971 Isuzu Florian 1600 SS wasn't made to turn heads. It looked like a civil servant's car, something you'd find parked outside a bank manager's house or idling outside a tea shop. Square, upright, and deliberate. Nothing about it screamed performance. In fact, most didn't even realize Isuzu still made passenger cars in the early 70s, let alone one with sports ambitions. But hidden beneath that forgettable silhouette was a lightweight sedan tuned for spirited driving. The SS variant was equipped with a 1.6-liter G161S inline-4, fed by twin Mikuni Solex carburetors. It made around 115 horsepower, not a shocking number by today's standards, but in a body that barely tipped the scales over 2,200 pounds, it moved with surprising urgency. 0 to 60 came in under 10 seconds, and its tight 4-speed gearbox made it feel even punchier than its numbers suggested. Isuzu engineered the Florian 1600 SS with suspension geometry that wouldn't be out of place on a more serious performance platform. Double wishbones up front and a live axle in the rear, tuned for surprisingly sharp handling. It didn't roll over in corners like you'd expect from a sedan in this segment. And while most buyers were looking at the Florian for its practical charm, those who got the SS trim knew they were buying something rare and oddly rewarding. But the Florian 1600 SS had its compromises. The interior was stark, even by early 70s Japanese standards. Build quality was solid but unremarkable, and Isuzu's limited dealer network made parts a bit of a treasure hunt. It never caught fire in the public imagination, which meant it was outshone by flashier rivals before it ever got a chance. Still, that's the whole point. It didn't need flash to be quick. It just needed an open road, a driver who knew what they had, and maybe a Camaro at the next light to prove it against. Quiet, capable, criminally overlooked. The Florian 1600 SS wore a gray suit to work, but its weekend plans included humiliating cars twice its size. Number 8, 1972, Nissan Violet 160J SSS 710. If the Florian slipped under the radar with quiet confidence, the next car didn't even show up on most people's screens. And yet, it had one of the most underrated powertrains of the decade, dressed in total anonymity. The 1972 Nissan Violet 160J SSS, also known internally as the 710, was Nissan's attempt to wedge performance into an economy box without anyone noticing. On the surface, this was the commuter special. Angular body, conservative trim, chrome just where it needed to be, and not a millimeter more. It looked like the kind of car you'd see a high school principal driving in 1975, clipboard in the back seat, briefcase in the trunk. Nothing sporty here, right? That's until you looked at the badge, SSS. That wasn't for decoration, it meant business. Under the hood sat the L16 engine, Nissan's venerable 1.6-liter inline-4, mated to twin SU carburetors and tuned to produce around 109 horsepower and 102 pound-feet of torque. In a car that weighed under a ton, that power felt brisk, especially paired with a close-ratio 4-speed manual and a surprisingly eager throttle response. The Violet's real strength was balance. Nissan engineers had done their homework, giving the 160J SSS independent front suspension and a semi-trailing arm rear that, while not groundbreaking, handled tight corners with poise. This wasn't a car that felt like it was trying to be fast. It just was. Predictable, planted, and more rewarding the harder you pushed it. Most owners never found that limit, but those who did didn't forget it. Still, there were trade-offs. The interior was basic. Vinyl and hard plastics dominated, and rust was a silent killer that took many 710S off the road before their engines had a chance to stretch their legs. The styling, while clean, was so understated it bordered on invisible. That's exactly what made it the perfect sleeper. It's easy to overlook the Violet 160J SSS, even now. But back in the early 70s, this was the kind of car that would shame a bigger sedan in a backroad brawl, and then drop your kids off at school without breaking a sweat. Quiet, tidy, fast. The sleeper formula, done right. Number 7, 1975 Toyota Corona RT100 2000 GT. If the 160J SSS was a lesson in how to disguise sharp handling, this next one was a masterclass in how to cloak raw punch beneath business-like formality. The 1975 Toyota Corona RT100 2000 GT wasn't the kind of car you'd expect to raise eyebrows. It looked like it belonged to a regional bank manager, parked dutifully outside a suburban office. Boxy, upright, dignified. A car built for punctuality and polite nods, not performance. And that's exactly what made it dangerous. Buried under that squared-off hood was Toyota's legendary 18RG engine, a 2.0-liter DOHC inline-4 co-developed with Yamaha. This dual-carb setup made a healthy 130 horsepower and 122 pound-feet of torque, numbers that might not sound explosive today, but were nothing to shrug at in the mid-70s, especially in a rear-wheel drive chassis that weighed around 1,100 kilograms and had well-sorted suspension for its time. With a close-ratio 5-speed manual available in some markets, the 2000 GT badge wasn't just for show. This was a car that could hustle 0 to 60 in under 10 seconds, fast enough to rattle any V6-wielding domestic cruiser caught sleeping at a red light. And unlike some of its sportier siblings, the RT100 didn't scream for attention. The grille was modest, the stance conservative, even the badging was small. Toyota knew what they were doing. That said, the Corona 2000 GT wasn't perfect. The ride leaned a little firm when pushed, and the recirculating ball steering didn't deliver the precision you'd get from a Celica. But in terms of sleeper DNA, this car had it all. It wore the suit and tie, but underneath, track shoes and a loaded gym bag. People often forget the RT100 because it lived in the shadow of flashier Toyotas. But for those in the know, it was the corporate assassin, a car that looked ready to file paperwork but ended up filing past everything in its class. And here's a thought. If Toyota made this their family sedan, what were they hiding in their true performance lineup? Number 6, 1970 Mitsubishi Colt Galant GTO MR. If the Corona RT100 was a tailored suit with knuckle dusters in the pocket, this next one was a school teacher by day, street fighter by night, no flashy sideburns,